The New Shadow is often described as an incomplete sequel to The Lord of the Rings. It's more accurate to say it exists as a manuscript of just over a dozen pages that seem to be quickly abandoned. What exactly is this sequel? Why was it abandoned by Tolkien? This video will detail what we know about the New Shadow, and will provide my own thoughts on this introduction to a thriller of revolutionary plots, satanic cults, and children playing at orcs. Before getting into the details surrounding Tolkien's views on the New Shadow, I think it would be helpful to those unfamiliar with it to give a very brief summary. It is, after all, only about 13 pages long. The New Shadow is set during the time of Eldarion, son of King Elessar and Arwen. It is set during a time when the events of the Lord of the Rings, or more specifically, the War of the Ring, are known only to those who were children at the time. The lessons learned from victory over Sauron are seldom heeded by the people of Gondor. It is the fourth age of Middle-earth, the age of men, and as mortal men there is a reliance on history, verse, and stories to relive years gone by. A man called Borlas, of a place called Pen Arduin, is revealed to us as the son of Beregond. Beregond was a man of arms of the Third Company of the Citadel in The Return of the King, and knew the threat of Sauron well as he lived through it. He was the one who met Peregrine Took when the Hobbit had become a guard of the Citadel. His eldest son, Bergil, was 10 years old at this time, and Borlas in the New Shadow is the youngest son of Beregond. Borlas is in his garden by the great river Anduin, in sight of Minas Tirith. In conversation with a man named Sauron, he speaks of a constant presence of evil residing in the hearts of men, described as a dark tree that cannot be felled forever. Sauron recounts a tale when Borlas scolded him for wasting unripe fruit from his garden, calling it orc's work. Sauron was unhappy at the time, but Borlas claims that the misuse of unripe fruit robs the world and hinders what would be good in its path to becoming good. In response, Sauron mentions that men have a habit of felling trees for their own use. Borlas retorts that if the tree is used for some decent purpose and never wasted, then it wasn't wrong to cut it down. Growing weary, Borlas is pushed into continuing the conversation by Sauron, who wishes to discuss a growing evil. He claims that it wasn't possible that it was his own childhood acts of mischief that brought up the topic of the dark tree, before making a reference to a figure called Herimor, whom Borlas should know. Apparently, a growing number of people are unhappy in these days following the death of the Great King, referring to Aragorn, who died 100 to 120 years earlier, depending on the version of the text. Borlas does not know what the unrest could accomplish, but is asked how he came to know the name Herimor. There is a stalemate, with neither wishing to answer first. Sauron then offers to tell Borlas everything if he returns at nightfall, clad in black. With that, he leaves the garden. Borlas recalls his son, Berilach, a friend of Sauron, and remembers news of ships disappearing, and a scent of old evil seeping its way back into the world. That's it. I would say using a term like unfinished sequel gives far too much credit to the New Shadow. We don't really know how long it took Tolkien to write just over a dozen pages of this new story, and how many times he started over, if any. It is entirely possible that this was one of any number of ideas that he considered for a post-The Lord of the Rings story. The key theme seems to be that as men, flaws exist inherently, and that these flaws cause unrest and complacency even in times of great peace and celebration. So soon after the reign of the king that returned and brought salvation, man has already started to slide back into evil, forgetting what was sacrificed and earned to reach this time of prosperity. 2 of Tolkien's letters explain why he decided not to pursue the new shadow beyond the 13 pages that can be read in The Peoples of Middle-earth. Letter 256 has Tolkien explained the basic idea behind the story, with him realising that he could have created a thriller from it. Tolkien was uninterested in writing a thriller, saying that it would be just that and not worth doing. His other works were beyond writing a story for the sake of a story. They exist as a place for languages, cultures, histories, and fables. It is the creation of the secondary world, the mythology. While I understand Tolkien's reasoning, I think The New Shadow is intriguing and could have been decades ahead of its time as a dark conspiracy thriller in a setting such as Middle-earth. I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall of Mordor, but it proved both sinister and depressing. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety with good, so that the people of Gondor in times of peace, justice and prosperity would become discontented and restless, while the Dinas descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors, like Denethor or worse. I found that even so early there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a centre of secret satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going round doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. Letter 338 then has Tolkien outline a lack of writing in the Fourth Age of the world as a whole. Tolkien states plainly that the King's Peace would contain no tales worth recounting. These wars of the Fourth Age would have little interest after the grand defeat of Sauron in the Third Age, a defeat that changed the destiny of Middle-earth and ushered in the Age of Men, following the departure of figures of power on both sides of the War of the Ring at the end of the Third Age. I have written nothing beyond the first few years of the Fourth Age, except the beginning of a tale supposed to refer to the end of the reign of Eldarion, about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. Then I of course discovered that the King's Peace would contain no tales worth recounting, and his wars would have little interest after the overthrow of Sauron, but that almost certainly a restlessness would appear about then, owing to the, it seems, inevitable boredom of men with the good. There would be secret societies practicing dark cults, and orc cults among adolescents. I think it's important to note that there is a certain finality to the ending of The Lord of the Rings, and especially many of the events listed in the appendices. If we look at the end of the First Age, the world is not at peace. It has taken a deep breath, or a sigh of relief, after the catastrophic events of that age. Morgoth has finally been physically removed as a threat, yet his stain remains. Some elves linger in Middle-earth, others go west. Numenor is razed and men are gifted, but not all of them. The world is broken in spirit and in physical terms. From this point, the Lieutenant of Morgoth, Sauron, sets about his own task, putting things to order, eventually becoming the second Dark Lord to trouble the world in the process, a direct threat to elves through rings of power, and an eventual threat to the other races. Despite elves and men fighting both Morgoth and Sauron, I'd say Morgoth is to elves as Sauron is to man, the greatest threat at a time when they are close to inheriting the world. Sauron is temporarily defeated at the end of the Second Age through the last alliance of elves and men. But again, there is no celebration. Countless lives are lost. Great kings of elves and men perish. Kingdoms fall, and Sauron finds a way to return. The Third Age is truly when men are set to be the ones to defeat Sauron, to earn their position of authority over the world. Thousands of years of hardship result in the Ranger Aragorn coming forth, with aid from the west in the form of Gandalf. The race of men, including hobbits, defeats this godlike threat, the greatest in millennia. Is there then happiness at the end of The Lord of the Rings? Yes, more so than in any other age. There is sorrow at the departure of many elves, and wounds to heal with the world left recovering from the evil of Sauron. However, we need only look at what happens with man inheriting the world, and Aragorn beginning his reign. The age of men begins in the Fourth Age, a time for healing, rebuilding and growth. There is much to mourn, but more to celebrate. All of that hope, a main theme throughout all of Tolkien's works, seems to be undone with the new shadow, and so soon after the reign of Aragorn. I certainly don't mind some good, depressive storytelling, but it's easy to see how this can ruin what was given at the end of the Third Age in The Lord of the Rings. This is why Tolkien would describe it as sinister and depressing. The bad side of humanity wins in the end, and that in turn means Morgoth wins. We aren't so naive to think that evil would no longer exist following Sauron's downfall, as even Gandalf speaks of other evils that may come in his rousing speech in the last debate. But a political thriller desecrating the reign of Aragorn would have been depressing to Tolkien.
Other evils there are and may come, for Sauron is himself but a servant or emissary. Yet it is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are sent, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule.
I think Tolkien is better at writing darker material than he's credited for. The Children of Húrin is mainly based on the legend of Calervo, but Tolkien made it his own, and it's hardly as light as hobbits tramping through the Shire on a hunt for mushrooms. My own interpretation of the new shadow has me view it as a precursor to the eventual return of Morgoth, a slow return, year by year, century by century, until the seed he planted during the time of the dawn of man allows him to return from the void. This is of course my own reading of the story and the tales of the end of days, and there's no indication that Tolkien was considering this. I find it even more interesting that the greatest threat to man shifts from the source of evil to his greatest servant, and then to an internal struggle. It has shifted from personifications of evil, great, almost cosmic, incomprehensible figures, to a look within, to the hearts of men. Possibly an even more terrifying prospect, since such an enemy may be impossible to defeat. No longer would a Dark Lord halt the progress of man, and man would have to deal with his own nature. I am left thinking about what could have been, accepting that Tolkien's passion for such a project was non-existent, understanding that it would undo the glorious end to The Lord of the Rings, but also thinking that this shift to internal conflict and political intrigue would have been exciting to read, and could have been a worthy sequel.